Hey everyone, you got Marcel back again. Bear with me if I seem a bit dreary or grumpy in my videos. I'm trying to cut my caffeine addiction. I'm on day 2, so it kind of sucks. But hey, supposedly it only lasts 9 days. That could be a lot worse compared to other addictions, so we'll see how it goes. As for the topic of the day, I want to discuss where the apple fell. And for those who don't already know, that's a reference to a quote or a phrase that, the apple never falls far from the tree, typically referring to someone's children and how much they resemble their parents. This may be an interesting video for anyone who is either interested in having kids or is ultimately goal-oriented around their children, considering at some point starting a family. I have to give a little backstory, though, to give context as to how I wound up in the situation that I'm going to describe. See, it all started with my ex-wife. Now, before she and I had ever gotten married, we dated for, I want to say at least a couple of years. Though this is when I was in my late teens, so it was a little while ago. Looking back on it through a clearer lens, I can recognize that the entire time she and I were dating, she had wanted to get pregnant, which comes down to her insistence on certain things like not using condoms and stuff, but I had been dating this woman for years, so it wasn't as big a deal to me, and I was being stupid back then. Not to mention we had been living together. She had had some kind of birth control shot that supposedly lasted for years. I guess they don't do those anymore. I haven't done any research on them, but this is what she had told me. But the shot had expired and she simply hadn't become pregnant, so we just kind of went with that. Yes, I know I was an idiot. Well, one day she comes out of the bathroom with kind of a smirk on her face, and I'm like, hey, so-and-so, what's up? What's going on? And she looks at me behind these kind of cold green-blue eyes and says, your problems are going to get a lot worse. Those were the first words out of her mouth verbatim upon finding out that she was pregnant. You see, my ex-wife was an odd one. She had very poor social skills. She couldn't interact with people well. When I first started dating her, I initially thought it was a form of shyness. It was almost cute, the way she presented it. But over the months and at some point years, I began to realize that it was actually a flaw in her. There was a lot of things that she would do intentionally to cause me as much discomfort as possible. An example would be simple decisions. She would intentionally not answer them or give me any straight answer at all for that matter, but would rather make me wonder and choose, and that choice would often always be wrong. Now, you would obviously call that a shit test. I didn't know it at the time, but the amount of effort she put into it to make sure that I was wrong was so extreme that her own sister called her out on it and was like, Jesus, just answer Marcel, stop screwing with him. So, petty mind games was only the beginning. Over time, she gradually progressed into complaining about me to people openly, sometimes directly in front of me. At some point along the way, she became physical. Although none of it was directly towards me, it was in the form of breaking my things. Like she would damage or destroy my stuff, and would do it where she knew I would find it or discover it later on, especially if it was really valuable to me for some reason. But every time I would confront her or I'd say something to her about it, she would always have this kind of a cold, emotionless expression with a smirk when she would address me. And she'd get this kind of a raspy sound to her voice when she would speak to me. There's no way for me to replicate it, especially coming from a woman, but it sends chills up your spine. It's really creepy. But that image of her speaking to me that way with that cold look in her eyes, I don't think that I'll ever forget that. Now flash forward a few years and you've got a little older version of Marcel trying to help raise that family. Now she had already had kids before she ever met me. Her eldest daughter, no relation to myself, was being torn back and forth emotionally due to a custody battle between my ex-wife and the child's father. I want to say she was, 10 or 11 years old at the time. Well, this had been going on for several years, off and on. Every time the dad would get up enough money saved, he would send another volley of court cases at my ex-wife, and they would spend a few months going back and forth until one of them typically my ex would budge and he would get some more wiggle room with his daughter where he'd get to see her more often or would have more control, pushing for joint custody, that sort of thing. Well, the whole while he was doing this, he was programming or teaching his daughter to regurgitate everything her mother said or that happened in her mother's house. And I know this because one day I'm, driving down the road with her, and I'm like, so how are things going? What you been up to? Just kind of a family day out with me and the kids. And she turns to me like a perfect little recorder, and it almost sounded robotic, and starts saying, well, today mom did this, and before that she did that, and then this person did this, and then I saw that be going like that, and she goes on and on for like 2 minutes, and I'm like, whoa, hey, stop. I'm asking how you are doing. I don't need to know all that stuff. How are you? And she goes, I'm doing good, thank you. Not to jump around in my story, but at that time frame, I was in the process of leaving my ex-wife. I wasn't living with them anymore, so I'm assuming just having a masculine father figure ask the question triggered that response with her. I asked her whether or not that she had been told to speak like that, and she hesitated only momentarily before saying, yeah, that her parents always ask those sort of questions, so she had only assumed. See, the way they had fought that battle back and forth was by poisoning the other parent in the child's eyes. And over time, she had learned that the best way to get in good graces with each parent was to tell them that the other parent was bad or wrong for something and tell them everything that other parent had done. And that would allow her to get more attention and more affection from the current parent. Now, realize I'd never interacted much, if at all, with that other father, so there's nothing I could have done about that. Long story short, the battles between them ultimately wound up poisoning her mind. And she only started healing after he won custody. Yeah, the guy won for once. How about that? Looking back on it, I'm kind of proud of him. In the winning part, not the programming part. Once she no longer had the influence of the mother, she started going back to normal. So the pull and tug back and forth was what was causing all the problems. I see her occasionally on Facebook on her father's profile. Yeah, on my personal Facebook, I'm actually friends now with the dad of the daughter of my ex-wife. So I guess the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? He and I are cool now, at least as far as I can tell. I tried to warn my ex-wife of what was happening, but of course, I became the villain and I wasn't allowed to hang out with her daughter anymore. Go figure. Don't ever do them favors, guys. They won't appreciate them. The point was, with all of that, is the guy that she was battling against was probably making between two working parents $120,000, $140,000 a year between the both of them. And it still depleted a ton of his resources. It had to have been sheer luck that he won that battle, and the courts fought him every step of the way. But my ex-wife was completely dysfunctional when it came to certain things dealing with social interactions, especially in a very formal sense, like a courtroom. She couldn't cope very well. So, she was broken, and it still took him years before he finally convinced the courts to let him have the kid. Meanwhile, honestly, the child is the one that suffered the most because of all the tugging back and forth and lies and being taught to make up stories and stuff to get the favor of the other parent. She has become a perpetual liar to where they had her in a room talking to professionals with one parent present and they would swap them out and she would completely change her story. Then if they asked her directly why the two stories didn't match, she would get really confused and scared and wouldn't know what to say. Everything she was doing was just to try and please the parents, and it was tearing her apart. But to go back on track, as far as my kids were concerned, I wound up having two. Seeing her eldest daughter go through all of that was the reason in my mind where I didn't want to fight for custody, because I guarantee I would have had to go through exactly the same thing living in the same county with the same judges. It was going to be a 4 to 6 year battle, and I don't make, or at least I didn't at the time, make $140,000 a year to go fighting that. And all for what? I knew for a fact that my ex-wife would have poisoned my children's minds. It would have happened, and it happened anyway. To get further in my story here, they were already poisoned regardless of the fight, so it didn't matter either way. My logic in the way I handled the divorce in itself was I was trying to work with my ex as much as possible, with the children being the priority, making sure they had a good future ahead of them and had as much support from either one of us. I'm not talking financially, but in all perspectives. As much support and comfort as possible from both of us. I made a genuine, wholehearted attempt to try and work with my ex-wife as a team from that perspective as much as I possibly could to see that the kids did okay. So how did that turn out for me? What was the outcome? Well, for one, my youngest child doesn't even recognize me as her father now. She has been reprogrammed to call me by my first name. If you ask her who her dad is, then she will automatically reply that it's the stepdad, the one that lives with my ex-wife now, her husband. And this is while I was visiting them regularly, doing everything that a quote-unquote good dad should do, and giving her all the emotional support in the world. Any attempts to explain that I was her father would put her into an emotional rage that I was trying to steal her dad, and basically came from them teaching her that me saying that I'm her dad is trying to take the other dad away from her. So they set a mental trap for me. And that's not even the worst part. This gets a lot deeper. The eldest daughter, the one that had been living with me the longest, they couldn't just reprogram her to pretend like I didn't exist, like I wasn't a real part of her life. But when you only have 2 days, 4 days a month with somebody, you can't really give them a positive influence. You can't help them much emotionally. To this day, I still don't know exactly what they did to that girl to cause her to become the way she is. But it all started when suddenly at school she realized that she could blow the whistle on her parents and get a ton of attention. Now I realized this too back when I was telling my other video when I had the incident with my father. Well, this kid made up every story she could come up with. All of the most violent, horrible things you could think of, like getting thrown through a wall, for example, was one of the stories that she came up with to tell her teachers. And there was this huge investigation, and all these cops and CPS showed up, and there was this big uproar. And what was really odd about it was when I came to see them for visitation, I'd pick them up and they'd come out and hang out with me at my house. She comes walking out of her house and says, "Oh, by the way, Daddy, I'm gonna live with you now." Completely out of the blue. And I'm thinking, wait, what's going on? So I go in there and I sit down and had the most interesting conversation with her mom and her husband, where, they were ruthless to each other. That guy even said, I didn't even know she had kids when she and I first hooked up, and then all of a sudden she's pregnant, and then I have to marry her, and blah, 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 and I don't know what's going on with your daughter, and all these stories she's making up, we can't figure it out, and what's going on, but, I hope whatever you, Marcel, decide to do, that you'll keep us informed and stuff, and it was just weird. But a big part of it was him bad-mouthing his wife right in front of me. They were going back and forth against each other to her ex-husband. It was almost funny if it wasn't such a twisted situation. Anyway, pulling it back into perspective, when I'm driving back to my house, the older daughter, the one that caused all the problems and got CPS called on him, looks at me and says, "By the way, Dad, don't think this is bad or shallow of me, but I did all that because I wanted to live with you because you have a pool." Totally open about the fact that she had made the entire thing up, that none of it was real. Well, when we finally got to the house, a day or two went by when there was a bunch of stuff to get done, right? We did some fun things during that time frame, but finding out what I'd found out, obviously, I'm busting out that phone, I'm calling people, I'm trying to figure out what the next steps are, right? Because that's a big deal. Regardless of whether or not some of them were true, a kid just doesn't make up that sort of thing, typically. At least you would think. Well, finally, after a while, she gets tired of waiting and says to me, Marcel, Dad, when are we going to go to the pool? I would like to use the pool now. And I looked at her and I said, well, it's winter, the pool is closed. She gets this kind of a shocked look on her face. She goes, "Oh, really? Well, I guess I'm ready to move back in with Mom then. So yeah, I guess it was genuinely just over the swimming pool. During this whole time frame, the younger daughter had gotten sick, just had a really bad cold that was bothering her. And the thing is with my ex-wife, she refused to let them use any kind of medication, never took any herself, not even Tylenol, nothing whatsoever. She wasn't healthy or a naturalist by any stretch of the imagination. No, she ate horribly and didn't take any care of herself, but she refused to use meds. It was just a quirk about her. Well, I called her up and I said, hey, the kids are acting kind of sick. The younger one especially, the older one a little. Do you mind if I give them some herbal medication? It's made out of honey, and it's completely harmless. And she said, well, yeah, sure. I mean, it's just honey, right? Yeah, it's minty honey. So it's just to maybe be like, make them feel like they're going to take some medicine. It might help a little. And she was fine with that. And I asked her, hey, you want to try something out? I'm going to ask our eldest daughter not to tell you if I give her that medicine, and we could see how she reacts to it, to whether or not she's going to lie between us. And my ex-wife was really into that idea. She liked the idea of seeing whether or not our eldest daughter would play us against each other like the previous daughter did. Well, I did that. I played through on that story. I went ahead and I gave the older daughter some of this honey medicine. And I said, hey, if I give you this, your mom's against meds, but you don't feel good. Yeah, she said she had like a headache or something. And all I told her was not to lie. I just asked her, if you tell anything to your mom about this, she's going to get mad. Then I won't be allowed to give it to you anymore. So do you promise you won't say anything? And I get these little puppy dog eyes. Oh, I promise, Daddy, I won't say anything. Please give me something to feel better. But I didn't explain to her that it was only honey. Well, when we finally had a sit down at the end of those 3 or 4 days that I had them, everything was sorted out. I found out ultimately there was no way that I could get custody because of that incident. And apparently if one parent were to genuinely abuse a child, the response of the state would not be to give the child to the other parent, but rather to take the child away completely. So from that incident, at least between me and my ex-wife, it ended up being a stalemate. But none of that is relevant to the big picture of this whole story. When I sat down and my ex-wife, myself, and our eldest daughter had a little talk about, what should be done further and that you can't make up stories and stuff, and nothing was really brought up from her end about wanting to use the pool, of course, because she would never admit to that, referring to my daughter. But what stuck out to me, what kind of caught me off guard, is this little girl, this little child, looks over at me with something of a smirk on her face behind cold, heartless eyes and says, "By the way, Mommy, Daddy gave me medicine." She was staring directly at me when she said it. And the only thing I can think of to explain it is that she was soaking up all of the expected response that I was going to give, the pain it was going to cause me. She almost looked excited. With that expression on her face, my whole world came crashing down. My legacy through those kids, if there ever was to be one, died that day. I was staring right at a carbon copy of my ex-wife. Nothing I had done made any difference. All of the effort I put into supporting them, the extra money, the stuff that I bought for them to try and make their lives easier, driving hundreds of miles back and forth every month just to see them, it all meant nothing. It wasn't even that she had told the truth to her mother. That wasn't what bothered me. It was the way she did it, and the fact knowing that she was essentially betraying her promise right in front of me. That kid had no allegiances to me whatsoever in any way. She didn't even wait until she was at home. And then to add icing to the cake, 2 weeks later I get a call from my ex-wife saying, "Hey, we're gonna need you to sign a form stating that you're not going to give our daughter any medication from this point forward because she's telling us that you give her lots of meds." And I had never given them medication before that. Like I hadn't had a need to. So after everything that was happening, the ex-wife was believing the daughter, even after we had agreed to see how she would respond about it. She was believing the daughter. I don't know how exactly to respond to all of that. The thought that she could make up some kind of story about me the same way she did of her live-in parents, her mom and the husband, and the fact that, of course my ex-wife is just going to completely roll with any possible story that she would ever come up with. I was so vulnerable to anything that could happen. I don't know if it is possible for children that young to be so vindictive or hateful or take genuine joy in harming their parents like that. But the fact that the look in her eyes, the moral of this very long, overdrawn video is essentially how a person is raised and the experiences they go through in life can mean everything when it comes to what parts of you get carried on. And I realize genetic fitness is a thing, that's how many kids you've had and whether or not your, genetic footprint is carried on to future generations. But the parts that matter, how we influence the world around us, how we're remembered, can mean a lot more than that. Really, the only way to guarantee that you're going to be remembered the way you want is to raise the kids yourself. If there's any turmoil or any conflict at all between the parents, it just harms the kids. And the court systems are designed to drag that on, to make it as painful as possible, of course, especially for the man. But in reality, it's all about money. It's all about getting everybody paid. And the children are the one who suffered, because my kids could have had a bright future. But now they're likely to only live the life that their mother lived, because that's who they're becoming. The soft-hearted approach that I took with my ex only allowed her the time to teach them all of the bad things that she could come up with. So you tell me, was I a bad father by playing the blue pill simp role and buying them all the stuff they needed and paying for their bills and taking care of them when I really didn't need to after the divorce, by giving my ex-wife all the room she ever wanted to raise them and just going along with her and respecting her views? Did I do the wrong thing? Should I have fought her and followed the other path and tore them apart between us? Would that have been the right thing to do? Recognize if you choose to try and start a family with someone in this day and age, your experience is going to probably even be worse. I'm not guaranteeing that. Maybe you'll get lucky, but it potentially could be a lot harder. This is why I would advocate some form of either like adoption or even going through and getting surrogacy in another country. I believe it's Sandman who's really big on that. If you want more information, check his channel out. Don't leave someone with control over your children, because in the end, any influence they can do to set them against you, they will. There seems to be nothing more vindictive than an ex-wife clutching to her children, even when the man that she's pushing away isn't a threat in any sense. I hope you don't mind my drawn-out story. I realize that a lot of you may say that I was very wrong for one reason or another. In the end, I was just trying to do the right thing. But we never get a lot of tools on what the right thing is supposed to be. So I fell back on the only thing I knew, which was being a nice guy. And that's where it got me. Tell me what you guys think down below. This has been Marcel.